Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Luke Mcleod. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm a librarian at Vancouver Island University. This webinar is being recorded for educational purposes, and transcription has been enabled if you would like it. I'd like to start us off in a good way by acknowledging the land that we're gathered on today, wherever you might be joining from. For myself, I am an uninvited settler of English and German descent that is joining today from my home in Lanceville, British Columbia, which is located on the traditional unceded territory of the Snuneymuxw First Nation, and I'm grateful to be able to live, learn, teach, and share knowledge on this land. I encourage you to ask any of the questions that arise for you in the Q&A field as the session goes on. Both of our speakers today, once they have presented, we'll be going through those and they'll be happy to answer any questions that you have. Our first talk this morning is titled Convenience versus Control, Youth Privacy in Voice Assistant Ecosystems. Smart voice assistants are becoming routine in youth digital life, yet privacy controls often remain hard to understand and harder to use. We're pleased to welcome a researcher in privacy-focused AI, Dr. Sorry, I have a bit of a cold. Dr. Ajay Shrestha will present findings from his office from the Privacy Commissioner of Canada's funded research project on youth privacy and smart voice assistants. He will include insights from empirical analysis to highlight youth privacy perceptions and behaviors in SVA ecosystems, with practical implications for platform design, education, and governance. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Ajay Shrestha, who is a computer science professor at Vancouver Island University and an adjunct professor at the University of Saskatchewan. His research focuses on privacy-preserving technologies including blockchain, federated learning, and ethical AI. He specializes in smart contracts engineering and data trust, developing frameworks that enhance trust, transparency, and user control. As principal investigator on the Office of the Privacy Commissioner of Canada's funded research program, he studies how youth perceive privacy risks and benefits, and how transparency, trust shape behavior, and what design interventions support privacy, self-efficacy, and meaningful control in everyday technology use. Over to you, AJ.
Thank you, Luke, for the introduction. I'm going to share my slide here first. Can you see the slide?
Yep.
All right, I should begin now. Okay. All right, so good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining. So today I will present findings from our research on youth privacy with smart voice assistants, SVA in short. SVA, they are things like Siri, Google Assistant, Alexa, and so this research that we've been doing at VIU has been funded by the Office of the Privacy Commissioner of Canada's Contributions Program. And the title here, I've changed the title to from framework to practice now, and this is intentional because I'm not only describing the concerns. I will connect the evidences to what can realistically be improved in design and in education and in governance as well. The core message from our study is that privacy, the youth privacy with smart voice assistant, is not a one-time consent moment. It is actually an ongoing negotiation, and that is shaped by a lot of factors like convenience, unclear data flows, and different capacity to act on privacy preferences. So here is the roadmap. So first, I'm going to talk about the evidence base, where I summarize what the broader smart device literature tells us about youth-centered privacy by design. Second, I ground that in youth-focused insights. Third, I will introduce the study, the survey study, and walk through the measurement steps we used to make the privacy negotiation measurable. And then we will look at the key findings, subgroup patterns, and finally the model that connects perceptions to privacy protective behavior. And finally, I'll close with some concrete implications, limitations as well, and future research directions. Okay. So let me start with the evidence base. Okay, we conducted a Prisma grounded systematic review with n equals to 122. So we have 122 studies on youth privacy within Smart Voice Assistant. And we had context like home, school, and health domain. Just a quick note on Prisma, if it is new for you, PRISMA, Prisma. So that stands for uh, Preferred Reporting Items for Systematic Reviews and Meta-Analysis. So it is actually a structured method for systematic reviews. And basically, it is a transparent process actually for how studies are found and how papers are screened, how they are included. So the review is, replicable and not just like, cherry picked. From our literature review, four messages stood out. First one, exposure is ambient and multi-context. So we had smart devices based papers, and we found that they move, the smart devices, they move beyond clicks into audio, video, locations, and sometimes biometrics, and often in, shared spaces like living rooms, dorms, or classrooms. And second message is the evidence is actually technically rich, but uneven. There's a lot of, papers, a lot on, technical mechanisms, but less on policy usability and education. As you can see there in the pie chart, the thematic distribution, it shows the bulk of the research is technical with less emphasis on policy and very much less there on education, just 12%. Um, so that is again based on our systematic review, okay? And a third is scaling privacy by design fails without alignment, because a strong privacy needs a couple of things, right? Like enforceable baselines, usable controls, and of course the sustained privacy literacy. And they are all, covered by different papers in the domain of smart voice assistant within like youth privacy domain, okay? And the last message is the implication for smart voice assistants in different contexts there. In the area with this, youth privacy, they are just for always listening, architecture, and it is meant for, the privacy stress test. The thing is, there are policies, right? Even the policies exist. The governance and the usability aspect determine whether the, protection is real in all, day-to-day use. So these are the, four messages that we found through our, literature review. And then um, we ran the focus group studies. Okay, so focus group studies include youth, the Canadian youth, ages 16 to 24, and a few themes came up very consistently. Theme one is benefits keep SVAs in daily routines. The youth participants in the focus groups, talked about using smart voice assistants for everyday things like playing music, setting reminders, asking quick questions, or using voice commands when their hands are busy. So the benefits, the convenience is very real, and it becomes part of their routine as well. And theme two is always listening concerns persist. Many youths repeatedly described discomfort with ambient listening. They were actually unsure about how long the data is stored, and they're also worried about what companies might infer from their activity across apps and services. And theme three is we saw actually a clear usability problem around privacy controls, and we would call this a wayfinding gap. Wayfinding gap, because the policies feel unreadable, settings are actually fragmented, and the deletion of the history is experienced, and a state of like unverifiable uh, context. All right. So I mean, in other words, I would say the youth cannot easily confirm that privacy actions actually worked. Okay. And theme four is that the protective behavior, privacy protective behavior, is often workaround based. The thing is, instead of fine-grained setting management, youth often mute or unplug, refuse permissions, uninstall, or even avoid the adoption of such kind of technology. Okay, so these are the narratives that we obtained from the focus group studies, and they motivated a question like, can we quantify what drives the privacy protective behavior and where the bottlenecks are? Okay, so then so this slide here summarizes why the smart voice assistants amplify privacy negotiation. A couple of things there. First, smart voice assistants operate through always-on listening and the wake word architecture. That simply means the device is listening for a trigger phrase, okay, like Siri or Hey Google kind of thing. And that raises ambient surveillance concerns, even if companies say they only store after activation, okay? And second, many smart voice assistants are shared household devices, and control often concentrates in a primary account holder, and that also reduces the youth uh, agency or youth autonomy. Third, the data flows and the retention pathways are often opaque, and that weakens the transparency and trust factor. And the fourth one, convenience. Okay, convenience remains very high, which reinforces the privacy paradox. Okay, privacy paradox means people or youth, they may express privacy concern, they know about privacy, but they still use the technology because the benefits are immediate and the costs are uncertain or delayed. Okay, so that's privacy paradox. And that's the context for our research questions. So three of them: patterns, negotiations, and implications. So now to interpret the youth behavior in a structured way, we use the PEA framework that stands for Privacy Ethics Alignment in Artificial Intelligence. So this is a validated framework, and it's kind of like a conceptual lens that frames privacy as multidimensional lived negotiation. Okay, um, the actual framework, the PAAI framework, includes 5 validated constructs or dimensions. I'll define them briefly here. The first is PRB, that's perceived risks and benefits. It asks questions like, um, what do I gain from using that kind of system, or what might I lose? So this is the trade-off logic. Okay. TT, that's a transparency and trust. That's the second construct. The questions like, do I feel the system is open, understandable, and fair enough to trust? So these are the questions included within trust and transparency construct. And the third construct is the DOC, that's a data ownership and control. Here, questions like, do I feel I can actually act on my preferences? Okay, kind of thing. So it's more on data ownership and the control that you can have on your data. And EA, that's education and awareness. So here are questions like, do I have skills and knowledge to navigate the settings, or to navigate the consequences, kind of thing. And PDS, that's a parental data sharing. So in our youth context, household mediation matters, right? Parents or the guardians, they can protect youth privacy, they can play the role, but when they involve more, then they may also reduce the youth autonomy. Okay, so these are the actual the dimensions included in the PEAI conceptual lens. And in our study, in our current study, we actually operationalize 5 similar constructs, the measurable constructs, and they are all aligned to that particular lens, PEAI lens. Okay, and they are PPR, that's a perceived privacy risks, PPBF, perceived privacy benefits, ATT, that's algorithmic transparency and trust, PAC, that's privacy self-efficacy. Self-efficacy here is that the confidence that youth can have, or youth have in managing the privacy and reducing the exposure. So that's the privacy self-efficacy, PSE. And the last one is privacy protective behavior, the actions youth take to protect their privacy. So these 5 constructs, PPR, PPBF, ATT, PSE, and PPB are all measurable constructs, all validated as well in our current study, and they map to different other dimensions of PAAI framework. Okay, the core takeaway here is that privacy is negotiated through those 3 components, trade-offs: risk, benefits, transparency, trust, and control actions. Okay, so with that framing, I'm going to show you the study design. Okay, so this is the phase 3 survey study within a multi-study program. The phase 1 developed and refined the PAAI perspectives with the different stakeholders. Phase 2 captured the smart voice assistant experiences through our focus group studies. And the phase 3, this current study here, it quantified the relationships and it compared the subgroups as well. So methodologically, the survey that we conducted used a 5-point Likert item, and it included around 469 Canadian participants aged 16 to 24, with at least one of the all of the participants basically using smart voice assistant in the prior month. Okay. And the ethics approval was also obtained from the Research Ethics Board of VIU. And you see the demographics as well there. They basically indicate the meaningful diversity in gender identity as well, and also the SVA use frequency. Okay. So here is the instrument. We have 5 constructs, 4 items per construct, so 20 items across all the dimensions there. At a higher level, the PPR, this privacy risk, it captures worries about collection, access, retention, and misuse. Okay, and PPBF, that's benefits, they capture convenience and personalization benefits. ATT, that's a third construct, this algorithmic transparency and trust. It captures perceptions that the system is, transparent, and the organization is trustworthy in how it uses data. PSC, it captures confidence. It's kind of like the confidence, yeah. So whether you are able to find settings, whether you are able to manage, exposure and reduce the risks. So these are the, items included in PSC. And PPB, it captures reported, behaviors. Okay. So not the observed behavior, because we've only, carried out the survey and focus group studies. So all of the studies give us the reported behaviors. The behaviors like, reviewing settings, deleting history, or, even refusing certain features. So those items are in the PPB, that's protective behavior. So PPB is behavior, PPBF is the benefit. So this, sounds similar, so we label them carefully. So next, so before interpreting the results, we actually need to check the measurement quality. And in our study also, we reported the reliability and conversion validity. Okay, so we have Cronbach's alpha for internal consistency, and composite reliability, and Dillon Goldstein rho for reliability measures. Okay, just a simple interpretation is, if their values are around 0.7 or higher, then we typically consider those, constructs as, acceptable in our studies. Okay, and in our case also, the reliability meets the that particular threshold across all of the constructs. And then the conversion validity. So for that we used AVE, that stands for average variance extracted, and it asks, do the items for a construct actually capture enough of the signal for that construct or not? And again, the common rule of thumb is that, just AV greater than 0.5 is acceptable. Okay, because that explains, the half of the variance in that particular indicators. Okay, And in our case, all of the constructs exceed 0.5 threshold. So the bottom line is that the instrument is suitable uh, for the descriptive profiling and also for the subgroup comparisons as well. But this is only for smart voice assistant context. Okay. Next here, the survey results. So I'm going to start at the construct level. So 5 constructs, and these are the mean scores on a 1 to 5 Likert scale. So the highest is risk perception, PPR. That has a mean value of 3.61, and it indicates that the risk is around, moderate to high concern level. Okay, and the lowest is ATT, that's a transparency and trust, with the mean value of 2.52, and it is below the midpoint. And other constructs, benefits, self-efficacy, and protective behavior, they sit near the midpoint. So from this, construct level means, we actually can say that there is a, you know, profile gap, all right? So we see the concern is salient, so it's most important. Trust is relatively weak, and the capability, like the self-efficacy and the protective behavior, the actual actions, they are not consistently high as well. So, and this is basically, consistent with the privacy negotiation idea. The privacy negotiation idea is that, youth are not indifferent. They are often unsure whether the effective control or the usable control is truly available. Okay. Um, so now here we go deeper. Okay, this is item level mean scores, and they show where concerns, trust, capability, and behavior, diverge. Okay, and the pattern is quite striking. The highest protective behavior item is PPB3 with the mean value 3.98. So PPB3 is refusing features item. Okay, so that is an avoidance friendly action, and it is relatively easy to do, and it has the highest score. The lowest protective behavior items there are 2 actually. One is PPB1, which is reviewing permissions. Main value is 2.41. Another one is PPB2, that's a deleting history. Main value is 2.47. These are actually, the protective behaviors, which obviously require some, a better understanding. And often, just they need to do it in a repeated manner, so they might have like a lowest score. Okay. And looking at the other constructs, so on the risk side, a leading concern is unauthorized access to voice data. Okay, so that's PPR3, and the mean value is 3.72. On the ATT, that's transparency side, the weakest area is ATT3, which is the belief that companies are upfront about processing. Okay, and this is again consistent with the policy fatigue, or the opaque data flows ideas. Okay, and on self-efficacy, PSE, one low point is confidence in managing overall risks. So that's item number 4, PSE4. The mean value is 2.74 there. So the overall pattern is that the avoidance is more common than the actual ongoing privacy management, and it suggests that the design and governance should target the friction in active control. Okay. So so now here the subgroup patterns. So here we compare high versus low protectors. Okay, so this is a subgroup finding one here. High versus low protectors means the top versus the bottom quartile of privacy protective behavior. Okay, and if you are not sure about quartile, quartile means dividing the sample into 4 equal groups. The top quartile is the 25% on protective behavior, and the bottom quartile is the lowest 25% on protective behavior. Okay, and this is the heat map, and it shows item level differences. Okay, the key deltas are PSC, that's a self-efficacy, is higher in high protectors by positive 0.67, and also PPR, the risks is also higher in high protectors by 0.63, positive 0.63. But benefits are slightly lower, minus 0.28, and ATT is not significantly different. Okay, so what separates high protectors from low protectors is that it is not, simply trusting the system less. Okay, it is more than that. As you see, PSE and PPR are both high, right? So it is primarily perceiving higher risks and having higher self-efficacy to act. And so this is actually a very critical design signal. If you want to improve the protective behavior, then we need to work on capacity building, increasing the self-efficacy, not only on raising the awareness. Okay. And here, so this is the subgroup finding 2, and it compares heavy versus light smart voice assistant users. Okay, heavy means like a daily or weekly users, and light means like monthly or rare users. So the largest difference is in perceived benefits, which has positive 1.11 for frequent users. So that is actually a large practical difference. Okay, and other differences are also there, but they are similar. Okay, so ATT is slightly higher for heavy users. That's just positive 0.34. Risk is slightly lower, negative 0.22, and the protective behavior and self-efficacy, they are not significantly different here. So the interpretation is, since ATT is slightly higher for heavy users, right? So frequent use is driven by the utility, like the benefits kind of thing. So so if there are stuff like this benefit aspects or personalizations, then the use might be higher, but the capability, the self-efficacy to manage the privacy does not automatically increase with more use. So that's the main interpretation here, and it actually supports a pretty good point. The thing like if the platforms, if they want privacy by design to succeed, then they must reduce the friction for active control for all, even among heavy users who are habituated to convenience. So that's another critical design signal, right? So next here we have two subgroup findings here. So we compare age groups and gender identity as well. So for age, the largest gap is higher risk among young adults by 0.41 compared to minors. So regarding the multigroup analysis, our second presenter, Molly, she will cover that in more details in the next part of the presentation. Okay. And for the gender identity here, the patterns can be informative, but we must interpret cautiously due to the small subgroup size for the category, which is non-binary and other. So we only have N as 15. So the slide also flags that the PPR test, the perceived privacy risk test, is not statistically significant, around P 0.094. Okay, P is the probability. That's a quick note on P value there. Okay, so if P is less than 0.001, then we say the relationship is very highly significant, statistically significant. If it's less than 0.01, then we say medium kind of statistical significance there. If it is less than 0.1, we call it marginal significance. So here we have P 0.094. It's some kind of like a marginal significance. It's there. Okay. So that's the P value, the probability value. Okay. Well, from here, the interpretation could be like this sort of patterns. They function as a design signals. Okay, so not the definitive claims, but some sort of design signals. So this suggests that youth privacy experience is not uniform, and we need to have inclusive and adaptable controls. So that's the main interpretation. Okay. So now here, so we move from the descriptive patterns to modeling relationships, and for the modeling we used partial least squares structural equation modeling, PLS SEM in short. So here you see a couple of interesting results. First, self-efficacy is the strongest driver of privacy protective behavior. So you see the path from PSE to PPB has a p-value less than 0.001. So it's a very highly significant, and beta is 0.373. So it's a quick note on beta, which is the path coefficient, and it has a value between -1 and +1. And it indicates the direction and the strength of the relationship. Okay, if it's positive, it has positive direction. If the value is greater than 0.3, we consider that as the proper relationship. Okay, and here the interpretation is PSE to PPB is highly significant. So when young people, if when they feel capable, when they have higher self-efficacy, then they believe that they can manage settings and reduce the exposure, and they are then much more likely to take actions, protective actions. Okay, and second, risk increases protection, but risk does not reliably increase self-efficacy. So you have PPR to PPB significant, PPR to PSE not significant. That means like a concern alone does not automatically or necessarily build self-efficacy. Okay, and third, benefits can dampen the protection. You have benefit to behavior has beta as a negative value -0.13, and p is less than 0.1 marginal significance. So when convenience and other benefits like personalizations are very important, then they can reduce the likelihood of protective behavior. Okay, and it is consistent with the privacy paradox as well. And the fourth one, transparency and trust matter primarily through self-efficacy. Okay, so you see ATT to PSE, it's very significant, highly statistically significant. P is less than 0.001. But ATT to PPB, trust and transparency to protective behavior is not significantly, not statistically significant there. Okay, but through other constructs, they might be significant, right? So direct from ATT to PPB is not significant. So that means like when system feel more transparent, and if they feel more trustworthy, then youth report higher confidence and higher self-efficacy, and which then supports protective action or protective behavior. Okay, I can also show that through this actual visualization. So this is the structural equation model. On this model, I want you to just focus on the flow of influences there. Okay, the key pathway is ATT to PSE to PPB. That's it. Transparency and trust to self-efficacy, privacy self-efficacy, and then to privacy protective behavior. So that's the main pathway. Also, we have risk that connects it directly to protective behavior, PPR to PPB, but PPR does not do the work of building capacity, so it doesn't reliably build self-efficacy. So nothing about PPR to PSE though. So this model actually supports a key design lesson, that is to increase protective action, like a privacy protective behavior. We should not rely only on informing youth about the risks. Okay, we must also reduce the friction and build capability so youth can translate intent into action. And so then so we have 3 recurring themes here. So they are basically part of the negotiations that youth can have while using the system. The first one is a risk benefit, which is pretty much linked to the perceived risks benefit aspect of PAAI lens. Okay, and the second is transparency and trust. So they also align with the TNTT, that's also transparency and trust in privacy ethics alignment framework. And the last one is control action gap. So it is linked to 2 of the constructs of PAAI. They are data ownership and control and education and awareness. I'm going to talk about that more in the design implication. Okay, so here the design implication for smart voice assistant platform. So based on the item level frictions, so we propose four actionable principles for SVA platforms. The first one, make data flows visible and controllable. Okay, so not just put stuff like the privacy is there kind of thing, but provide the persistent transparency and cues. Right? So basically, when it comes to reviewing or deletion of the history, make sure you have like a concrete inflow actions there. So and the second implication is design implications rather. We have build skills through guided interaction. So something like youth friendly onboarding and the explanation, like just in time explanations, they can actually translate the privacy concepts into doable steps. Okay. And third, reduce friction for protective actions, like so one-touch privacy shortcuts, some kind of like granular consent, easy to understand, terms and conditions in the consent, and especially support for individual profiles on shared devices in the shared environment like house or kitchen or classroom, so the youth are not locked out of control, right? And fourth one, adapt autonomy across the developmental stages. We need to use scaffolded controls and inclusive threat models. So it's very important to treat all of the subgroup differences as design signals and not as a noise to a result. Okay. And I do have here one implication matrix. So it summarizes how multiple stakeholders can act across the standard PAAI dimensions. Okay, so for platform design, the message is usability is a privacy feature. Okay, so make actions like deletion and permission review discoverable, understandable, and verifiable. So it's very important for the designers, for the organizations as well, right? So for educators like us, the message is we need to teach privacy as skill, not just awareness. So if privacy self-efficacy drives protective behavior, then the curriculum or the curricula should include, hands-on practice. So like where the settings are, what retention means, how deletion works, and how to verify the changes. So, um, so therefore, the educators and for policymakers and regulators, the direction is toward enforceable baselines and meaningful consent in practice. So not only in theory though, okay? So if youth experience transparency as unreadable, then the transparency standards must include usability and not just availability, right? Uh, and also for the guardians and parents. So I can say like the balance is mediation without erasing youth agency, especially for shared devices. So next, this is the final slide here. So now I will close with the limitations there, some future work directions, and also then summarize the key takeaways, okay? There are, of course, some important limitations. We conducted this survey, focus groups only with the Canadian youth. So this is Canadian sample, online sample. So the generalizability is not universal, okay? And some subgroup sizes are very small. So those comparisons should be treated as exploratory. And because we focus everything on the main construct, which is privacy protective behavior, but that construct or the factor, the protective behavior is self-reported, and they may diverge from observed settings behavior. And the last one is the instrument that we had developed. This is for SVA focused, okay, smart voice assistant focused instrument. It can be adapted, but if we need to extend this, instrument to other conversational, AI, then we need to validate those constructs again. Okay. And the future work priorities include the longitudinal and intervention studies that can raise self-efficacy and test whether behavior changes or not. And they also include the cross-platform and cross-jurisdiction comparisons, and the triangulation study, triangulation with, ethically designed observational or, time-based or log-based measures. So they are our future research directions. And to close, just three takeaways. First, risk remains salient, while transparency and trust is the weakest construct. Uh, and second, the privacy protective behavior, the protective action hinges on self-efficacy, but the capability is actually the bottleneck here, okay? And third, we should design and govern for negotiation, legibility, inflow controls, and capability building there. So the youth can actually translate preferences into actions. So these are the main takeaways from our study. And I would like to stop now and thank you for your attendance here and listening to this presentation. So I welcome your questions now, if you have any questions.
Thank you so much, AJ, for that great presentation. While folks think about their questions, I have a couple of my own for you. So my first question is, your results show that youth reported high privacy risk, but the easiest protective action is refusing features. So while more active actions like reviewing permissions or deleting history are lower, what does that tell you?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So yes, I mean, in our study, we saw that the protective actions like refusing features, they have the highest scores, and it basically tells us the barrier is not awareness, it is capability, it is usability as well. The young people, youth, they can take easy procedures like low friction actions like turning something off or refusing a feature, but the ongoing privacy management actually requires harder actions like navigating the settings like fragmented settings, right, and trusting that the actions work. So the fix is transparencies should be there, and also the usability. So if you want better protection, we need controls that are easy to find and that are simple, that are verifiable. So make a review and delete actions which appear to be very hard action as easy as uh, low friction action like turn it off action. So yeah.
Uh, I don't see another question from an audience member yet, but I have more.
Okay.
You recommend inflow controls like reviewing or deleting the last interaction right after use. Wouldn't that reduce personalization though, which is like the main benefit for people who are using smart voice assistants?
Well, it doesn't have to uh, reduce the personalization. The goal is not to remove the benefits, like the personalization, of course. It is to give youth control over what gets kept there, right? After any sort of like a voice interaction, the assistant can offer, a simple choice like keep it to improve personalization, delete it, or auto delete after a short time, right? So those three offers or choices can be given, and the personalization can still work with limited retention, especially if more processing happens on the device, right? So the main idea is the benefits. The personalization should not require the permanent history. Yeah.
Thank you. We have one question in chat, which is, will a link to a publication be provided later for reference? So the webinar is being recorded and this will be posted online. And then there is a broader website for the project hosted
Yeah.
on GitHub, which we can certainly provide a link to. And I imagine that GitHub site will link to any corresponding research as well.
Yes, that's correct. So we have our, research project website as well, and it has the, link to all of the publications. Yeah.
Awesome. I got one more question for you.
Mhm.
Oh, we have another one. Was there any research into user tools allowing for review of the information that the Smart Assistant database is storing?
Mm. So there are actually a couple of research that shows, the data are actually storing in the cloud or in their shared repository as well. So yes, there are some literature in that domain. The idea is it's not so transparent, right? So you need to dig into the implications and infer that okay, yes, the data has been stored there and that it has been shared within their connected network of companies. And again, like some of the tools that we see, they are open source, so it can clearly give us an idea about the data retention policies and sharing policies. But other than that, if the system are like opaque, then it's a bit difficult to go into their backend and see like what's happening behind the scene, right? It's just through the inference only. Yeah.
We have another one from a participant. Can the companies manufacturing these units be held accountable for applying these findings to improve their products?
Absolutely. So this is the main objective of our research, because this has been funded by the government body, is from the Office of the Privacy Commissioner of Canada, and the findings will be used. Again, the all of the findings that we have been providing here, they are from our side and not from the OPC. Uh, but again, all of the findings, they have been validated. They have been peer reviewed. So they are important for the government bodies, including our Office of the Privacy Commissioner of Canada. So they are going to use, they should, I mean, it's up to them also, right? But they will use most of the important findings and probably just incorporate them in developing new rules and regulations. Yeah.
Alrighty. Well, I want to be conscious of ensuring Molly has enough time to speak.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
so I think we will move over to our next presenter. Thank you so much, everyone, for your great questions. I'm just going to put Molly on the spotlight and give her an introduction. So next, we're pleased to welcome a researcher from the Privacy Aware AI Research Group, Ms. Molly Campbell, who will present findings from Dr. Ajay Shrestha's OPC-funded research project on youth privacy and smart voice assistants. She will include insights from their work on age-differentiated pathways to privacy protection in smart voice assistants. Ms. Campbell is a computer science graduate from Vancouver Island University. She's been working as project personnel in the Privacy Aware AI Research Group under the supervision of Dr. Ajay Shrestha. Her research focuses on privacy-preserving technologies, data science, and ethical AI. She specializes in partial least square structural equation modeling. Over to you, Molly.
Okay, thank you, Luke. Just share my screen. Okay, so I'm Molly. I'm a project personnel for this project. So I'm going to be presenting one of our papers, which is called Age Differentiated Pathways to Privacy Protection in Smart Voice Assistants. So this is a multi-group PLSM study of our youth group of Canadians age 16 to 24. Myself and my co-authors are also Yulia Bubkova, Trevor DeClark, Ajay Shrestha. The principal investigator is Dr. Shrestha, and I'd also like to acknowledge again that our work was funded by the Office of the Privacy Commissioner of Canada. So my presentation for this will flow as follows. First, I'll present why age matters for smart voice assistant privacy. Then I'll show the model and method for this paper and the key results. And finally, I'll give what this means for some privacy by design implications for SVAs. So why age matters. So smart voice assistants have been changing the privacy surface in a unique way. As AJ stated before, they are often always on, and the voice interactions can blur the line between active use and more passive collection. And the data involved is not always just audio. It can also include transcripts and contextual metadata, which raises questions about retention, secondary use, and who has real control. For youth, these decisions are often made with limited visibility into what is collected, where it goes, how to manage it. And age matters because the context changes. So for kind of the minor group, those 16 to 18, the device setup and defaults may be more household mediated, so they'll have less independent control over accounts and settings. And then when you get to the older 19 to 24 group, you have typically more autonomy and kind of more direct responsibility for managing privacy. So the research gap that we're addressing here is that youth is often treated as one large group. So here we want to test whether those pathways that lead to privacy protective behavior actually are different for our 16 to 18 and 19 to 24 groups. And our core idea is that age may shift baseline perceptions, or it may shift the actual mechanisms that are driving these protective behaviors. So we have 3 research questions. Our first asks whether the 2 age groups differ in their average level of perceived risk, benefits, transparency and trust, privacy self-efficacy, and privacy protective behavior. Our second asks whether the relationship among these constructs is different by age, and this is what the multigroup PLSN component is addressing. And then finally, we ask what the results imply for developmentally sensitive leverage points. So in other words, what to design differently by age. Our contributions are a multigroup PLSM analysis with MyCom measurement and variance checks. Second, separating age effects on baseline perceptions from age effects on the behavioral pathways. And third, translating the findings into age-appropriate privacy by design guidance. So the model is actually the same that AJ presented in his presentation here. So we have our conceptual model with our 5 constructs, which again are the perceived privacy risks, PPR, perceived privacy benefits, PPBF, algorithmic transparency and trust, ATT, privacy self-efficacy, PSE, which is our mediator, and then privacy protective behavior, which would be our outcome. The key premise is that self-efficacy matters. So if youth feel capable of managing privacy, stuff like managing settings, understanding options, then they are more likely to take those privacy protective actions. So the model will explicitly test how risk, benefit, and trust connects to self-efficacy, and then how self-efficacy connects to actual protective behaviors. So methodologically, oh, sorry. This is a survey study of youth in Canada, age 16 to 24, collected online through Microsoft Forms. After cleaning, we had a total of 412 responses to work with, split into 2 groups, those 16 to 18, which had 245 participants, and those 19 to 24, which had 167 participants. And our study received full ethics approval from the BIU Research and Ethics Board. And here you'll just see a sample snapshot from the paper, which presents the demographic breakdown by group. So the analysis for this paper is as follows. So we estimate a PLSM model within each age group. Then we run a MyCom measurement and variant checks before comparing groups. And then we conduct a permutation-based multi-group analysis with 1,000 permutations to test whether specific path coefficients differ. So our focus is on those 7 direct paths among the 5 constructs that were seen in the model from the previous slide. And just to give a quick background, if you don't know what multi-group PLSM analysis is, it's essentially so as AJ mentioned in his, we saw that there was like a significant relationship between PSE, so self-efficacy, to protective behavior for our group as a whole. So now this will analyze that same relationship, but we're going to see if there's a difference between this age group and this age group. So before we can actually compare those CAF coefficients and make our decisions there, we have to ensure that our constructs are actually comparable between the two groups. So this is what it's called MICOM, which is measurement invariance, addresses. So our most important requirement in doing multi-group analysis comparison is called compositional invariance. So you'll see in our table here that that is called step 2. So that basically indicates that the constructs behave consistently across the group in the measurement model. So that actually allows you to compare them and make assumptions about them, like statistically. So in our results, our compositional invariance was supported across all 5 constructs, which then allows us to move forward and we can actually do that multi-group analysis. You'll see here in step 3, this indicates partial invariance. So this measures whether means and variances are equal. In our case, they are not always equal, but that's not very surprising when you're comparing groups. But the key point is that our path comparisons remain valid because we still have compositional invariance. So we can still interpret our differences that we find as meaningful. So for our first research question, we are comparing the means on a 1 to 5 scale. So we actually saw a couple of significant differences here. The younger age group, so 16 to 18, reported higher ATT, meaning they reported having higher levels of trust and transparency. And they also had higher PPBF, so they perceived strong benefits in voice assistant use, such as stuff as like convenience and personalization. For the older group, they actually reported higher PPR, meaning they had a higher perceived privacy risk. And they also reported higher PPB, so they reported actually taking more privacy protective actions. An interesting thing to note here is that there was actually no significant difference in privacy self-efficacy at the mean level. So that means that the groups are differing in their level of trust, benefit, risk, and behavior, but not in their actual overall confidence level. So our second research question asks whether the structural relationships differ by age. You can see in our table here that our main result is that most paths are actually invariant across age, but that is still a very useful finding on its own. It's just indicating that the core privacy mechanisms are broadly consistent across age. So you'll see here that across both groups, that PSE to PPB pathway remains positive. So in more plain terms, that self-efficacy is still a stable driver of protective behavior, regardless of age. And risk and benefit also show broadly similar relationships to self-efficacy and behavior. However, there was one meaningful developmentally sensitive difference. So the ATT to PSE pathway was actually stronger for older youth. You'll see here, so the beta coefficient for that group was 0.56 compared to a lower 0.356 for the younger group. With a small p-value of 0.024. So I think, as AJ mentioned, we would call that kind of somewhat or marginally significant. So the interpretation there is that as youth gain autonomy and maturity, their trust and transparency in these systems translates into capability more effectively. So older youth may be better to position themselves to convert the I trust the system into I can manage the system, which then supports actual protective actions. So this slide is more of our practical payoff and for our third research question. So it should be what should be designed differently by age while keeping the overall mechanisms in view. So for our younger youth group, 16 to 18, our design priority here is to bridge the efficacy gap in a practical way. So even though we've seen that they trust the system and see benefits, this is not translating into more self-efficacy as strongly. So design should reduce cognitive load and reduce the cost of action. To achieve this, we have proposed a couple of design strategies. So using guided privacy flows that present decisions in context rather than pushing users into dense setting menus. explaining immediate consequences, so what happens when voice history is stored, how retention works, and what changes when a toggle is switched, and then providing household-aware controls, because privacy governance could be shared with these household smart devices, so delegated review options, shared nudges, and clear ownership boundaries. So now when we consider those older youth, age 19 to 24, the design emphasis shifts towards autonomy and advanced control because they are more likely to convert that trust into capability. So for this group, we propose providing transparency dashboards that actually show data flow and retention and what is stored, and ensure reversible and opt-out actionable logging so you can actually verify actions and audit changes, and then offering fine-grained and temporal permissions so users can control privacy by context and not only by permanent settings. Across both age groups, the constant lever is that we need to prioritize the self-efficacy. The age tailoring is mostly changing how trust and transparency becomes actionable, but not whether that self-efficacy matters. So there are a couple of limitations in our study here. First, this is a cross-sectional study, so we do not claim causal direction. Second, our privacy protected behavior was self-reported, which means it may differ from observed behavior in real settings. Third, our device ownership and household governments were not directly measured, so that was inferred, even though they likely matter, especially for that younger group. And also, finally, this is a Canada-only sample, so the age split may hide variations within each subgroup. So the next steps in our work could be to use a longitudinal design, so to track how self-efficacy and protective behaviors actually develop over time, and add direct measures of autonomy, such as account admin and device ownership, including behavioral outcomes like observed setting changes or task performance, and then also replicating the study across different contexts with different privacy regimes. So I'll close with these three takeaways. First, age shifts baseline perceptions. Older youth are reporting higher risk and higher protective behavior, while younger youth report higher trust and higher perceived benefits. Second, across age, privacy self-efficacy remains the direct driver of protective behavior. So if we want privacy action, we have to design for capability, not just awareness. And third, the key developmental sensitivity appears in that trust to capability pathway. And we saw that that was significantly stronger for those 19 to 24. The practical action point is straightforward, building self-efficacy through age-appropriate controls and transparent, usable privacy features. Okay, so thank you. That's my presentation.
Thank you so much, Molly. While everyone works on questions for you, if they have any, I have one for you. And it is on that last point you had there. Your significant difference is mainly one path, ATC to PSE. Why is that the key takeaway, and why is it practically meaningful?
Yeah, so because we saw in our previous studies that the PSE is a direct driver of that privacy protective behavior for both our groups, and the only age-sensitive mechanism we detected is how that trust and transparency converts into capability. So practically, it means that this single design lever, like making transparency actionable, has different returns by age. So that's how we tailor how we operationalize transparency and controls for younger versus older youth.
Thank you. I'll give folks one more minute to see if there's any questions that arise, and I'll also take an opportunity to promote a follow-up event on a similar topic, which is that we're going to be gathering in the Nanaimo Campus Library on March 3rd at 8:30 in the morning, where more research on this topic will be presented on smart voice assistants, and breakfast will also be included. So I just posted a link to that in chat. We still have some seats available in the registration. Now we do have another question that's come in. Could malicious actors not infer the age of users simply by detecting what privacy setting framework is being used to being served to a user? Would that be an issue in this context?
Yeah, that's actually a very good point that you could perhaps identify, especially I think if you obviously that group is still technically like if you were talking about the minor group who would be more vulnerable, but even more so if you could detect if someone was a child, that could be extremely harmful. Yeah, there would definitely have to be again, kind of more on the manufacturer's ends, like ways that they would have to protect that setting so they weren't easy. It wasn't easily detected, like what age framework was being used. But that's definitely something I think important to consider that I hadn't actually thought about before. So thank you.
Awesome. Seeing no other questions, I just want to extend my gratitude to our speakers for joining us today, for sharing your knowledge and your expertise with us. I also want to thank all of the participants for your time, attention, and your questions. And just another thank you from a participant in the chat. Thank you so much, everyone, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And
Yeah.
as we mentioned before, this will be has been recorded and will be posted online if you'd like to review anything.
Yeah, thank you everyone, and thank you, Luke, for hosting this event. And I appreciate all of your time, and I hope this session was useful. So have a great day.
Take care.
Thank you.